Hello, government students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 23, Section 3, the Articles of Confederation. So, as we go along, make sure you're jotting down what you need. Let's start with the features of the Articles of Confederation. Some basic things that you should know. First, the Articles of Confederation had a legislative branch that was a unicameral. It was a one house legislature. So, as a result of that, there was no president, making it really difficult to have some leadership in that form of government. Committees of states would manage the government when representatives were not present. Got to remember that back in the day, the business of government wasn't a year-round ordeal. It was something that they would meet for maybe a number of days, but there were things that would go on year-round that needed to be taken care of, and that's what that committee of states would do. Along with that, we had no federal court system. So there wasn't like a national court. There might have been courts within the different states or at the local level. But when there was a dispute between the states, there was no place to have those cases heard. And then finally, uh, aside from the items that we mentioned, when our legislative body was in session, each state had one vote within that Congress. And unfortunately, to get a two-thirds majority, meaning 9 out of the 13 states to agree on anything, was really tough. And if they needed to amend the articles, you almost needed to have a unanimous uh, vote. And again, that was very difficult to do. So there were some issues here that we were starting to notice. So let's go through these weaknesses. The Congress that we had at this period of time had no power to levy a tax. Congress had no power to regulate trade. Congress didn't even have the power to force anyone to obey the laws that it passed, which really had to be a downer because of all the effort that they put into this. The laws that they passed really weren't worth much unless they could have somebody carry it out, and thus they had no power to do that. As far as approving laws, you needed a two-thirds majority, so 9 out of the 13 states had to pass it, which again was a very difficult number to meet. Amending Articles of Confederation required the consent of all the states. In other words, you had to have all 13 or a unanimous vote. And again, that was a very difficult vote to achieve. There was no executive branch within the Articles of Confederation. We only had one branch in our government that was a legislative branch. And so having someone that could basically force people to obey the laws, we didn't have that. And then finally, when we look at our branches of government, again, we didn't have a judicial branch, and thus we didn't have a national court system to allow the states to have a place to settle their disputes. So these are some of the big weaknesses. But as far as like good things, there were a few little things that we were able to do under the articles. Granted, under the articles, we did expand our territory. We added what is now known as the Northwest Territory, or kind of the upper Midwest. States like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, and a little bit of Minnesota would be part of that. So, the achievements. One of the things that they were able to do is to establish a fair policy of developing the Western lands, as far as how we're going to add states and how we're going to govern those. We also were able to forge a peace treaty with Great Britain to wrap up um, the War of Independence. And then we established these different governmental departments like foreign affairs, like today we would refer to that as the State Department. The War Department, today better known as the Defense Department. Marine, which would be probably more like commerce/transportation, and then finally the Treasury Department, kind of helping us with our money issues and financial stability. There were some problems that our nation was facing. One, we had some quarreling between our different states over the boundary lines. Some of these boundary lines led to, maybe some tension that could have possibly led to some violence. Uh, but because we had no court system, there was no place to take these disputes to. There was also issues about tariffs that states were charging one another for certain goods. Along with that, our government had a lot of debt that it had incurred during this Revolutionary War, and some of that was money that was owed to other nations, specifically France. But we also owed money to our soldiers who fought in the Revolutionary War. These men were promised a certain amount of money that would be paid kind of as a bonus or kind of retirement sum. And as the nation was kind of crippled by some issues, some of these soldiers wanted that payment sooner than later. It was really difficult to raise money from the states because the federal government or the national government had no power. And then on top of that, we had an economic depression in 1786 that left a lot of farmers with a considerable amount of debt. And that's kind of what leads to the Shays Rebellion that we mentioned before. All right, thank you very much.